Welcome to the monthly truck stop webinar provided by the Transportation Risk Specialty Program and the Motor Carriers Insurance Educational Foundation. These are presented every second Thursday of every month at 2 p.m. These webinars are not for CE purposes. They are designed to keep our members abreast of the changing in the trucking environment that affects their insurance. If you're seeking CE, we do have that available through our other webinar program. If you have a problem, if you have questions during this program, please write in the chat window and that we'll answer them if we have time. If not, we'll answer them after the presentation through a email to you. And if the question is generic enough and interested everybody, we'll share with everyone our answer and the question. If you have any problems during the presentation, please either write in the chat window if you have a problem or call our office at 800-741-4084. We're going to look at the current view of regulation. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things happening, and my friend Rich Bren and I will present this to you in a format that we hope will let you see our view of what we see coming down the pipe and what is actually already affecting our insureds. In the CCC Journal of 2015 Economy Outlook, they said that the trucking economy looks strong, but driver availability, regulation drag fleets down is a major concern. So even though 2014 was a great year, the industry analysis are bullish on this year too, but capacity has tightened as expected. Drivers are still hard to come by, and the political environment changes from day to day. Those are the two areas that we want to start discussing today. The demands versus availability to meet these demands, meaning the drivers and the truckers, the regulation. And so we're going to focus on that in this particular session that we're going to share with you today. Rebecca Brewster, who's the president of the ATRI, y'all are familiar with the American Transportation Research Institute. For you who attend our annual conference, that's Dan Murray's organization. Rebecca is in Atlanta, and she's actually the president of this. Dan works with her. Made a comment in an interview she gave that 46% of truck drivers were older than 45 years of age. The possible solution for the aging truck population includes focusing on driver retention, encouraging vocational training, and developing a gradual commercial driver's license that extends between high school graduate and beginning a truck driving career. This is an area we have because what that last statement is the possibility of having less experienced drivers, younger drivers behind the wheel. An older driver has a health concern, and they also have who's going to replace them. And the younger drivers have an insurance concern. So that's what we want to look at, is trying to balance those things. If our insurers do not have people sitting in the seats driving the trucks, they will not have any income, they won't be around. And so that's what we have to look at and develop. Also, the annual update on concerning motor carriers, the very top concern of a motor carrier today is driver shortage. Who drives the auto we insure is a concern for our insurer, as well as for us. As you know, the bottom line, or we have said often, the bottom line to providing auto insurance is the driver behind the wheel and the motor carrier's ability to select the proper driver, to control that driver by monitoring him or her, and to make sure that they live within the regulations and also drive safely. So let's look at a few things that have been in the news lately that does affect drivers. If you read Transport Topics, February 2nd, 2015 edition, FMA says testing drivers for sleep apnea is a decision for medical examiners to make. This was a major statement here. Congress had told FMCSA that they could not set rules concerning sleep apnea. It was projected when they did this that a high percentage of truckers meet the criteria of possibly being susceptible to sleep apnea. The problem that we'll deal in more detail is what the effect sleep apnea has on a truck driver. However, in 2000, May 21st, 2014, the DOT physicals now must be performed by an examiner on the Federal Registry. As you know, that examiner now has to qualify for a test and will be licensed to do that. If you look at that Federal Registry, you'll see that we have a lot of people that are not MDs. We have a lot of people that have other kind of medical provider degrees, but now that they have to be examiners, they're getting a memo from FMCSA reminding them to make sure that the drivers they are examining does not have a problem with sleep apnea. So the concern you have here, even though Congress told the FMCSA they could not set a rule up, they're now sending directions to the people who now must do the DOT physicals to be aware of this problem, and by doing that, obviously, to address that problem. Rich has shared with you that he has had sleep apnea, and I know you are done it, and he's done a lot of studies on how this health problem affects motor carriers and their insurance providers. Rich, I'm going to turn that over to you. Don't breathe so heavily, and let's talk about that, okay? We hear you coming through, brother.
See if I can avoid my daytime sleepiness here and press through this. Just to comment too, as Tommy referenced, and I've shared and talked to some of you in other places and even posted to my LinkedIn profile some of the stuff that's out there as this came down, this new requirement that you go through the testing and that you have to be one of the certified medical examiners on the National Registry. Now, we were concerned that there was going to be a lot of problems with not being able to find the doctors, and thankfully I think a lot of them are out there, so that shortage didn't happen, but I do believe it's driven the cost up, and you may be hearing that from your customers, and so, one of the things... Go ahead.
Let me make some... One of the problems we have, and this was actually discussed in a congressional hearing as reported by Transport Topics a week ago, they're not all doctors. This is some of the concerns they have, meaning they're not all MDs. And what we find is being replaced is the family doctor who the driver knew and understood now being examined by another health provider that could be a nurse practitioner, could be a chiropractor, even though I see nothing wrong with chiropractors as a medical facility or any one of these, but there aren't going to be the traditional doctors that some of our insurers went to who understand them. That could be good or bad. I'm just pointing out that when you use the term doctor, it's actually a medical provider that won't always be an MD.
And you're spot on, Tommy, and that's where, if any of you have been to a doctor, and I'm at that beautiful age in life where I get to see them, annually for different reasons, the reality is, they walk in with their laptop now, and there's everything being fed electronically. Well, that's put a huge demand on the health network, and I'm sure some of you sell health insurance, and you're seeing and hearing other things in other venues, but the point being, they need to focus their businesses, these medical clinics do, and that's where to do these kind of exams, you are finding, people. My own chiropractor has made it a point to bring in a physician assistant in his operation, and they've gone through it, and he's told me all that they had to go through in order to set up to do this. So you're right. It's not going to be the person that you may have wanted to go see traditionally, and this is another thing. If you ever subscribe to and follow some of the LinkedIn discussion groups, you see motor carriers and some of these DOT compliance areas complaining about the medical examiners. Well, the motor carrier really needs to be engaged to know who's helping to do this. And a good medical exam, quite honestly, should be able to say, can the driver do the kind of work that we need in our trucking situation? Because the trucking scenario for a fuel tanker, let's say, compared to an LTL, compared to a livestock hauler, all have different demands. And Tommy and I have presented that to you in different forums about, having a job description for the driver. Well, that all goes together here. So I'll stop talking about that topic, but keep in mind that is a big issue, and you're going to see something here later on too about people getting their medical exams attached to their CDLs. That's another issue we address later. I'm going to come back to sleep apnea. What is it? Sleep apnea, if you really look at the word, if you go to the Greek word, it means without breath. And so what happens to a person that has obstructive sleep apnea, OSA, is something that you see out there. If somebody has this, that means that they stop. It means they stop breathing. Their tongue, their soft palate, their throat muscles all relax, and it blocks your airways. You stop breathing. And generally, an apneic episode, as they call it, is 10 seconds or longer that you're not breathing. And so in my particular case, if you were to take an hour, that's 360 seconds. And in the 78 times that I stopped breathing in an hour when they tested me, that means that every 46 seconds, essentially, I would gasp. My body would have to fight to get air back again. So that's that person that snores, you know, all of a sudden they're not there and then they growl like a bear. Well, that's what's going on, is that their body is fighting for air again. So the impact that, you know, that's a 101 on what apnea is. It's a person who stops breathing when they're sleeping.
They came up with some characteristics, physically characteristics. You might just mention that. What characteristics does a body type have that would be the first indication that they could, and I'm using that word very carefully, could have this problem?
Well, they look like me, a fat old guy. You know, he's overweight. His neck is, you know, greater than a size. I believe it's a 16. You know, his body mass index exceeds a number which I believe is 31. There's a whole bunch of characteristics that are noted in all these journals and all the guidelines. You know, and so, you know, you're obese. You're over 40 years old. I mean, these are the kind of things that come into play. And, you know, and in reality, my father has it, my sister has it. If you look at my sister, she probably had it her whole life, and she is a woman of any overweight or obesity. It's just the reality. As I said, your throat muscles just relax and you choke. And so, yes, besides truck drivers, the NFL is probably the next industry because of those huge necks that those guys have from developing over the years. You know, that again is a employment group that is known to have sleep apnea. And so if you try to start claiming that's, you know, you've got it, you know, it's an improper diagnosis, right? And so,
well, that's what I said. It's a possibility, but it's not it's not a diagnosis. That's what point I was trying to make. But you just described a typical truck driver. One other difference between NFL is also a sedentary life too, which again a truck driver fits into. But go ahead. I'm just want to point that out. That's what the doctors first look at, or the medical providers or examiners first look at to see do we need to go further.
Yep. And so to that end, and I'm going to bring that back in, Tommy. You bring up a great point. So his next question, you know, what are the health impacts on motor carriers and their insurance? Well, all right, if you think you might have this issue, all right, you might wake up with bad headaches in the morning. I used to, you know, I should have bought stock in an aspirin company. I used to have such horrible headaches in the morning. Well, that's because you're waking up oxygen deprived. Your head hurts because you have not been sleeping and keeping the oxygen levels high in your body. You have potential to be a depressed person, to go through depression because of that. You have daytime sleepiness. Your blood pressure starts to go up. You start to have other impacts upon you, and the outcomes become heart attacks, strokes, diabetes. You know, you're losing your cognitive skills because, again, your brain doesn't have the rest, it doesn't have the oxygen, etc. And so, you know, what happens then is, you know, these symptoms, these outcomes, and, you know, what does that mean to you as an employer? Well, it means right up front there's a big risk to my health insurance because I've got this person who's more likely to have these things. As an employer, think about it. Your human resource, your people that work for you, why do you have them on your team? It's because of the knowledge, because of the skills, because of the behaviors that they bring. You want them, right? You want to have a winning team, and yet when you look at a truck driver who's on the road, and if he can't make good decisions, and he's making thousands of decisions every hour that he's driving down the road. I mean, when we talk about a driver scanning the roadway, needing to decide, you know, that gap between him and the next person and trying to see his clear way out and to make all these decisions, it's demanding. It's mentally fatiguing. Well, if you already started impaired, you know, and your behaviors now start to diminish because your skills are diminished, things happen, you know, and a poor decision can become fatal to yourself or fatal to others, you know. And so it's one thing for the truck driver to fall asleep, you know, and go off the road to the right and roll over, but it's even more tragic, correct, if he happens to go left of center and across the median. So that's what we're talking about. AL, physical damage, cargo, you know, yes, we can see those. We see those on loss runs. Workers' comp, you know, think about the guy who is obese and aged and high blood pressure and diabetic. He doesn't heal quick when it comes to workers' comp. And he's hard to insure if you can get him into health insurance. And so many of you see there's a huge push out in the industry, truckload carriers being a great example of healthier lifestyles for truckers, and that's what they're talking about. As I said, I resemble this syndrome of being the fat old guy, you know, being lethargic. I sit at a desk all day long. I don't move around a lot. You know, my workplace isn't much better than a truck driver's, really, because I sit in a chair for hours and hours each day, and they're sitting in a chair, you know, moving their arms at best and getting out at a truck stop. So what we're concerned about is the impact on driver shortage long term. You know, these people, if they have health issues that push them out of the truck, and if sleep apnea is one of those disqualifiers, here again, it's going to impact this, and it's going to impact that age group, that demographic that you're going to hear Tommy talk more about too, that 40-plus-year-old person, 40, 50, 60 years old. So, you know, treating it reduces the risk of these claims. Treating it, you know, reduces dollars, accidents and things. I've got all kinds of studies that have proven that. You know, some of your large motor carriers don't have their head in the sand, and they are taking action, and that's why a lot of drivers don't want to go to work there, because they're going to, in the upfront interview, ask them some things and may ask them to go participate in a study. And some of these are home studies rather than having to go into a sleep clinic and get all wired up. But there are things that can be used. You know, I can talk to people and sometimes personally assess them and see that they've got issues. But the truck driver, because of what they're doing, you know, the things that I talked about, excessive caffeine, nicotine, high carb, fat, truck stop food habit, none of that's good for them. You know, it reduces their life expectancy. I'm at that point in life, you know, not to be morbid, but, you know, I see what the obituary ages are. You know, and just the other day, a local truck driver, 39 years old, you know, long haul truck driver, he was in there. And I just shook my head, you know, and it's like, you know, there goes another one out of the driver pool. So this is not a career where a lot of them grow old gracefully.
So in this concern, as far as what we need to look at the insurance consideration, we need to be aware of this concern, and we need to look at our insureds and see if they are doing something in this area. One of the things that came out of the Truckload Carriers Association meeting that I was a part of, that I had the privilege of going to last weekend in Orlando, was that a number of trucking companies, one of which, the one that's owned by Dennis Dillington, who has spoken in our programs, they have a gym, and they're taking health efforts to encourage the drivers to be healthier, not only from this concern or not. So that's a concern long term that we need to be aware of, but we need to think about it as happening, to know that we might see some flux in the marketplace because of these new examiners and this memo. And so that's a concern that we thought that we would bring to your attention. To that end, though, with the medical examiners, go ahead.
Let me kick in on that. So, you know, give me a few seconds. That medical examiner's discretion, the U.S. DOT, the National Registry, that website has out there this memo that Tommy's going to talk about. And so the good thing is, at least now, it's at the medical examiner's discretion, but they can, you know, go through this assessment, and they can recommend some different types of testing and treatment. So thankfully, it's not that you have to do this kind of thing and you must treat in this manner. There's a little bit of flexibility and freedom out there, but still, that examiner is certifying it. So you still got to think about their perspective to this.
And my consider is, as I have discussed earlier, is that there's not a level playing field, and if we have to be concerned about shopping medical examiners who are connected to a sleep apnea situation or a clinic or a sleep clinic and those kind of things that might or might not be more susceptible to that. And drivers, as you know, through truck stops and other things, are aware of the differences in these examiners and what they look at, what they don't look at. But as a part of this also, we need to realize that the whole process is a CDL driver must certify as able to drive a vehicle every 2 years. This is how long these physicals last, every 2 years. It's the responsibility of the employer to make sure that this has been met. So the employer, the driver of a unit whose DOT number is on operating under. The point I'm here is this affects not only the true payroll drivers, but this also affects the owner-operators, the independent contractors working for you insured. So the person who uses that individual to drive a vehicle that has their DOT number on the side must make sure that they have this physical every 2 years. It's their responsibility. This is the new part of this. The responsibility of the driver today is they've got to take this certificate to the State Department of Motor Vehicle and have the agency noted on their CDL that they have been certified, that they have passed their physical. So the dilemma you have here is the driver has to do this, but the motor carrier has to make sure that the driver is doing this. The other conflict here is this does not correspond when their CDL license is renewed, and that's where you get the notification from the state that you need to renew your driver's license. In Florida, that's every 10 years. So this physical has to be done every 2 years. And the motor carrier's got to make sure and got to track that to make sure they have done that. Then the final thing that has come around is that, and a memo from the enforcement officers, that as of January 30th, 2015, a roadside inspection of the CDL information via the SIDless or netless indicates that the driver has medically qualified, meaning they've taken their medical certificate to the Department of Motor Vehicle, and that's noted in a database. They no longer have to have the medical with them. And this is major. We have all seen in driver fitness a number of our insurers getting citations, and their drivers get citations for not having their medical card with them. That's not going to happen in the future with this part of it. There still might be a problem of not being a qualified CDL driver who has not done it, because if you do not have the medical updated, then your CDL gets reduced to an intrastate CDL versus an interstate CDL. So your insurers must still be aware of this, must still it's done, and they must make sure the drivers are doing that part of it. And so this is a concern that we have. In fact, I pulled an MVR for one of my clients insured right now, and now the Florida MVR is showing on CDL drivers about the medical certificates or not. You want to say a comment about that, Rich?
Yes, I do. I live in Arizona, and as a retail agent, when I did that, we battled this a long time ago because you were supposed to do this in the past with Arizona before it became to the federal level, all states now. So recently, and that's what I shared with Tommy, recently there's been some press out in the trucking trades that drivers aren't getting this done, and so as Tommy said, they're not getting the benefit, right, of having the med card on their CDL, and they're getting stopped and they're being held because it's not on their CDL. So again, word to take home, word to your motor carriers that you insure: are your drivers aware of this, and is this one more thing that you're making sure happens, post a annual physical? You got to get down to the DMV and get it attached. And keep in mind, these are government workers, and sometimes somebody says, yeah, I'll take care of that for you. You got to make sure you're at the right place and that it happens, because sometimes you get put in the wrong bin, and the guy tried to do, your truck driver tried to do the right thing. It just didn't happen for him.
And there could be long lines, which we all are type A personalities and don't stand that. But again, the big discussion of driver shortage, the turnover ratio. This is a concern that we have. Larger truckload carriers, as reported by the American Trucking Association, has 130 to 150% turnover projected in 2015. I've been asked a lot of times from the insurance standpoint and from the motor carrier standpoint about what does this mean. Well, if you talk about our insurance and our insurance providers, what I've said a long time, if all I could ask an insured is one question to determine if I want to insure them or not, it would be, what is their driver turnover? Meaning, how much effort are they attempting to keep, or the effort they're putting in to keep the current drivers there? And that's a big concern we have. With this turnover ratio going up, then this churning part of it. So we've got to be concerned about that part of it and have that. But to this end, our friend Lana Bates says the standard of quality of the drivers they hire will be lower. The FMCSA came out and said we're going to have to consider younger drivers, less qualified drivers. And in the analysis done by the American Trucking Research Institute, the demographics across the decades reflect that one of the concerns of the driver shortage is, what does a high school graduate at 18 do before they can drive? So all this stuff is coming to a head as we look at this with these studies. The pressure of the driver turnover, the concern of how much effort your insurers are putting into retaining their drivers, how well that company treats that driver as a family, as a part of the program, not as a nuisance, not as something they have to have, but part of the program. What are we going to do with the quality of drivers? The conflict is we got to fill our seats, but the insurance carrier has some certain criteria. And what do we do to get them into the trucking industry? We've all read the stories about where nobody really wants to be a truck driver. Dan Murray tells a story about being in a meeting of the American Truck Association and asking the participants there, how many of the audience has young people between the ages of 18 and 30, and they raised their hand, about two-thirds of them. How many of you have your children work in your business? About a third of them. And how many of you have your children driving? And nobody raised their hand. So the industry itself doesn't do that. Most of you know that my father was a trucker, and the one thing he worked towards was to be able to provide me an education so I did not have to be a truck driver. And that's the whole stigma and dilemma we deal with, because, again, the seats have to be filled. Based on the study that ATRA did, the typical driver, white, male, middle-aged driver, 73% of all drivers will change. This has to change. Currently, there's only 21% black or Hispanic drivers and less than 5% female drivers. That's our traditional drivers. As far as the population goes, talk about females first. Females who are in the workplace. Again, I'm not discounting anything about working at home. I have a great deal of respect for that, having my family and my daughters involved in that part of it. But people who are out in the workforce, they have to represent 35–40% of our population, but only 5% of those people are driving. Hispanic and blacks represent, depending on the numbers you're looking at, 30–40%, but only 12% of those. This is the non-traditional truck driver that we're going to have to look at to attract into this marketplace. And so how to get more than white male drivers is something we need to look at. How to get younger drivers into the system we need to look at. How will the insurance industry react to the non-trucking drivers we're going to have to consider. Rich, I mentioned on the bottom here the three considerations: the pay, the driver time, the time home and school, others. What's your thoughts on this?
You bring up a good point, Tommy. I mean, they are trying to be creative and finding new ways, as you said, to get out there. I mean, not to boast of my state, but you know, we had a female from Arizona as the national grand champion, I believe, last year, truck driver of the year in the TDCs. But you know, how many are really doing that? And if you listen to their stories, it's tough. So, you know, I think motor carriers need to look at the job and to recruit people from different areas, and finding young drivers, and again, at that age in their life, how much do they want to be away and live in that environment and things like that. So it's getting more difficult. I believe some of you follow an attorney named M. Garner Berry. You know, he commented recently on one of his blogs about young drivers and being kept out of the seats, and kind of place the blame on, or pose the question: is that due to the truck driver not being able to get insurance? Are we at fault in the insurance industry? So, I'll come back to my comment. Knowledge, skills, behavior. What's the job, and can you honestly recruit people into that? And being able to speak to them about the good pay, and keep in mind who's the head of the household in different dynamics, right, of what goes on. So that may be a challenge for some women who traditionally, especially when they have children in school, to want to entrust, a lot of the dynamics of life that they would have to in order to go be a truck driver and be away from home for multiple days on end.
That's a consideration and a thing that we need to look at. Was thinking when I was reading those articles, and even when I wrote this program, the pay's going up. Every projection that we see, the entry pay is going up to $48,000 to $50,000, and the top level is at $70,000 to $75,000 now. That's about a 15 to 20, if not more, jump in the last 3 years, and that's a real concern. Where the motor carrier is getting the dollars to pay it. Fortunately, right now, with the fuel costs down from the high of $4 to somewhere around $3, for you who don't get involved in these dynamics, even with the motor carriers who are not governing their trucks at 62 to 65, who do not have all the fancy equipment on their trucks that lessen the wind resistance and those kind of things, that's a $20,000 difference in money, and that's a significant difference in money. That's where they're doing now, but in the future's not. For you who, though, write work comp and OCAC, if you write an OCAC policy, you might want to look at what your benefit is, because if the driver pay has gone up, have you increased your OCAC disability payment proportional to what they can make now? And work comp, as you know, that's a part of the payroll, and even though with the payroll going up, the audit's going up. So if the driver pay goes up 15 to 20%, the work comp premium is going up 15 or 20%. So it would behoove us to make sure we explain to our insureds, as they increase their payroll, they're also increasing their work comp cost. And that's going to be a concern as we move forward for our insureds not understanding those two types of the equation. The number one concern that most motor carriers have, and most the discussion have, is how often you're at home. That's the problem with attracting females and attracting the non-traditional drivers, mainly Hispanic, if not in the black community. They have a greater tradition of home life, and that's one thing that has to be overcome in this, is how to get the driver home more often. Any other comments, Rich? And we'll go ahead if that's okay with you.
I think you're spot on.
Headlines: Senators want Congress to reform FMCSA, says the agency has botched regulatory responsibility. You want to talk about that, Rich?
Again, if you read anything last week, that was a headline, all over the place. This lady who we appreciate from Nebraska, and taking to task. I mean, even the ATA called out the FMCSA about disregarding the GAO criticisms and data quality and the quantity. And so, in early March, on March 4th, was when this hearing was out there, where she nailed them about serious concerns, the flawed approach. I guess the good news is someone in Congress is starting to hear these things, and she was really ramped up about including the stakeholders, reforming these safety initiatives, having guidance on review of improvements, greater public transparency, doing cost-benefit studies. I mean, we've heard this out of our state and our national trucking associations, but finally to hear Congress talk about it, and to actually also call out the FMCSA with respect to having no regard, FMCSA's disregard towards Congress, towards the stakeholders, towards the independent agencies, and having an agenda-driven approach. So hopefully, CSA, hours of service, all these things that were questioned, will finally start to come forward with some sort of reform. We've heard, as Tommy calls them, our friends, from the attorney world to the, other stakeholders, Rob Mosley calling them out, Steve Bryan from Vigilo calling them out. So we're hoping now that maybe we have some congressmen. And I participated, I told Tommy, in another motor carrier trade group that's out there saying the same thing. And because of the dynamic of their vehicle design, they feel that they're unjustly discriminated against because their trucks are not combo units, and so then they are lumped into other straight truck type categories, which may even include buses and local pickup and delivery stuff where they're running long haul. So if you understand, you know, when you start getting thrown into these peers, you're not common to them, and so there just needs to be an awareness on some of these things. But kind of back to her thing, this 34-hour restart, I was saving it for later, but I mean, she's advocating you know, this criticism on how that was handled, and you already got a guy from New Jersey who's trying to get that which was just undone reinstituted, redone. He wants to go back. So,
well, it's encouraging to me that they are doing that. If you remember, some of you remember a blog I wrote last summer, Bren at her, who was the past director, at her hearing said, basically, to heck with the motor carrier. I don't represent the motor carrier. I represent the public. We're trying to make the highway safer. And so that's the economic benefit. What we see happening in Congress is trying to step up to do that. Now, she's left, and that's another part of the dynamics here, is that the current director's term expires this month. Who's going to replace that person? Who is the Obama administration going to appoint, and will that appointment get through Congress? So that's one thing that we're going to look at too, because we're going to have to see the directions at the FMCSA. There's a lot of things going on. In fact, I'm quoting an article from the Truckload Carriers Association magazine that says everyone can agree that Washington politics is going to make for interesting reading for the next 24 months. And the problem is we who insure these truckers have to deal with those changes. And talk about the changes, as she alluded to here, the hours of service. Congress budget deal suspending the truckers' rest area. That's that 34 hours that require 2 periods of time between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. Transportation chief, yet even in that, still defended that fatigue rule in it. FMCA offered details on the enforcement of the hours of service. It doesn't make the Attorney General begin, the Inspector General to begin on-site of FMCA 34-hour rules. Secretary Fox speaks to the state transportation, Senate Transportation Committee, was told by Republican Hanna. He was surprised the DOT again hired the Virginia Tech. I'm sorry, that's a typo there. Virginia Tech Transportation Institute to complete the study. We found out from Dan Murray at ATRA about how flawed that original study was, and now what we have done is gone back, and what Congress has done, because there's a new study mandated, they've gone back and appointed the same person or the same entity to do this same study. You know, this is important on the operation of a motor carrier, the suspension of motor carrier. It impacts us as insurance provider because there is some correlation between hours of service violations and crashes as far as the information the FMCSA has. And so as all this comes down, it's going to be a real thing that we're going to have to think about, both in operations and what's the motor carrier doing and how that's going to affect our insurers as we go forward. The new study and must be reviewed and revised. If the outcome is not what Congress liking, what will they do? Will they stand on their own and still pass it, or what's going to think? What's your thoughts on the restart as far as what might happen in Congress, as well as Rich, on what you see the impact of it for insurance? I didn't see a whole lot of impact other than understanding our insurers having to conform to it, and the problem with the lack of conformity, how it rates in scoring for the CSA, which we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Like you said, Tommy, I look at the unfortunate outcomes of what's going on, and people, you know, having enforcement actions against them, and everything that you've heard the Steve Bryans talk about and others. I mean, I see it day in and day out as we try to underwrite these things. The positive thing, and again, I hope it's not just press, you know, you're starting to see some other, you know, people talk about how they're using their technology to do a better job of managing the driver fatigue, to manage their hours of service. You know, I just spoke to one of our insureds just the other day, and he talked about how he's now able to, inside of his dispatch, have a better idea of that driver's ability to meet the demand, you know, to know what the roadway, the time, et cetera, should be. So if anything, you know, all of this is making them more cognizant. And back to another point that we've heard Tommy strongly advocate, if you're not using the tools that unfortunately software, electronics, et cetera, have available to you, it's going to be very difficult. You're going to have to be very astute in being able to do this off of paper-based records, whereas some of these people that are now using and harnessing these things to manage the issues, it's about managing their scores today and then trying to live inside of the regulations and to contribute their real thought-provoking reasons on why they think that these rules don't work for them, and to be able to demonstrate it.
And we talk about that part as a CSA. We talked about this, you know, it's still being questioned as a predictor of crashes. The discussion is, should scores be published? Can CSA information being used in court? All these things have raised its head. You have heard us at our annual conference, at blogs I've done, at the training programs that we do about all this thing. Will Congress pass a law to hide the scores and not allow them to be presented in court? This is what we're looking at closely, because there's been a couple bills passed. There's a bill that was introduced by Representative Lou Bartlett of Pennsylvania called the Safer Trucker and Bus Act of 2014. His said the CSA initiative data is not made available to the public, and here's the thing that I focused on: data may not be admitted into evidence or otherwise used in a civil action for damage resulting from an instance involving a motor carrier. That's the concern we have, because what happens with it, even though it's flawed, the plaintiff's attorney uses this information to exacerbate the injuries, to find fault for the insured, not because they did anything wrong, but because of these scores. We have a conflict here. Our friend Clay Porter at a meeting we did at a CIC program we did in October in Denver said it should not be admitted. Yet every insurance carrier I'm dealing with and every claims person I'm dealing with that I've had a chance to talk to says it is being brought up, and it is a consideration of how we handle the claims, even though it's flawed. So it's important for this to happen. I don't think it ever will. Because the headlines that we find in newspapers say, again, do CSA alerts affect my liability insurance policy and underwriting? Absolutely. Roadside violations do affect your liability exposure. These are all headlines. Has CSA increased the cost of liability insurance? Again, all these things are headlines, and so it's important to understand from this, for the insurance standpoint, to have these scores not available, but particularly not being used in court, because even though we can argue about it being flawed all the time, it's still something being used against us. As Rich mentioned, both Actress and GEO's study said it's flawed, yet cost at crash time. Should insurance companies look beyond the triangles? We hope so. But how can they if it's going to cost them more money? Can an agent help the insured with this? They need to explain this part of it to the insured and what they can do about it, and let them know, even though some of this stuff might be something that they cannot justify. Again, you've heard me say, how in the world can you justify a severity rating of 7, where 10's the worst, 1's the best, for not wearing a seatbelt, but speeding on interstate highways only a 1? It makes no sense, but that is the rules. So we're still going to hear about the CSA and making it public and making it available to everybody and used in court. Rich, what's your thoughts and what's your comments concerning that part of it?
Well, Tommy and I spoke earlier. I mean, you have to look beyond the triangles, and you have to try to work as best you can to get your underwriter with you to look beyond the triangles. I looked at one today that has a triangle on hours of service. That motor carrier has not had any HOS problems on their record since May of 2014, and yet the triangle's there. So now it's a matter of time and curing. It's not going away fast, is it? So, you know, that's where I think you have to help them. We've brought to you tools like, you know, Craig Lack's product, where you can dig down to the motor carrier individual vehicle level even and look at all of the incidents that are hours of service. So you can analyze it different ways, but you have to manage this, and you have to be talking to your motor carriers about their ISS score and that they know what's going on, because what's the best position that you can make this thing look like. And I hate to say it, every truck insurance underwriter and claims person that I know, when there's an accident, in a bad accident, they're bringing up the SMS and they're looking to see what it looks like at that date.
We also have a point that sometimes, Rich, I find is even when it's not, the insurance not at fault, it's being brought up in court. So this is a concern from the insurance. There's also a concern, we used to have a call from our insurers that said we cannot get a load because of our score. Under the journal, it says there is a law that was proposed in Congress, and I think was passed by the House, by the way, not the Senate. State's bill aims to remove the dark cloud over carriers hiring. This happens to be for the third-party administrators. The bill could limit the role of CSA scores on the use by a third party, meaning a provider of a load, a broker, a freight forwarder, or a shipper, to be held responsible for the safety of the trucker they use, that says that you would not use CSA scores. And so this impacts us too if this law goes through. So as the first one goes through to allow it not to be presented in court helps us. The second law goes through is when we get this call that says our insurers can't get a load because of bad CSA scores, that would not be a concern moving forward with this law. So how did we used to help them? Well, get a new DOT number. You know now with chameleon carriers, both at the CAB and Greg and the insurance company screening process, and also with the federal regulation looking at chameleon carriers out, then that can't be done. So this will help. Rich, I know you've talked to Hank Seaton about this, about what his thoughts on making the motor carriers, the shipper, freight forwarder and broker responsible for the safety rating of the motor carrier, and how this CSA scores affect that, and what he proposed on that. What's the update from him on this?
Continuing to pursue that. I mean, trying to impose vicarious liability. Unfortunately, there are plaintiff attorney groups that are out there that this is a new place where they want to go swimming, and so they're trying to now, imply an additional duty and obligation upon the freight brokers, and they're gonna continue to pursue that. So we, that underwrite in that freight broker space, and he works with a lot of people in that. You still, unfortunately, are trying to vet and yet remove yourself from too much obligation, and yet keep in mind the forces that you're working against. A plaintiff attorney group that thinks you're going to be identified as being negligent for handing a load over to this particular motor carrier. So no updates, Tommy. I just know he keeps pushing it, and that he's actively pursued.
The point I want to bring this up, the reason Rich and I included this, is that these things are happening, and it will affect how we write insurance, and it will affect how our insurers deal with their customers, which has been one of the problems with CSA as we move forward, just because of this, the safety event groups just don't make any sense. However, the other part that's based on CSA is that the third leg is coming through. FMCA director gave preview of the new safety fits determination rule. His comment was, CSA is a three-part program. Some of you have heard me talk about a three-leg chair, but only two have been put in place. The safety measurement system, including both motor carriers and driver, and then the intervention, which starts with a warning letter, and then the visits of the non-rated per visit compliance, is the two parts. The third part is the safety fits determination. That's what is coming proposed. It's been proposed forever. 2.5 years ago, when we were in Dallas, Rich, at the ATA meeting, Ann Fury promised us that it would be published in March. Well, that was March 2 years ago, and she's even left in that. But when the safety fits determination rule is published, the agency will have the legal authority, this again quoting the director, to assign monthly safety ratings to carriers. That means their rating could change monthly from satisfactory to conditional. As I discussed earlier with Rich, I don't think it's ever going down to unsatisfactory based on roadside inspections, but it could vacillate in those areas, particularly smaller trucker. It's going to be based on an algorithm rather than the conducting a manual compliance. Well, that algorithm now is a predictor of that. Today, the scores are based on a safety event group, a peer group comparison. The current system is based on a compliance review, and so that's going to be the big change. So it was published back in July 1st last year, and the published date was it was pushed back 17 days. This is supposed to be published in July 1st, 2015. That's the director is a CSA three-part program, safety measurement system, what we talk about. The current safety fitness determination is only when the DOT officer comes into the insurance office and does a complete compliance review. And so when an officer's there, they walk around for a rating. What you're seeing now is a lot of these reviews will not end up with a rating. It'll show a non-rating review. That means they did not go in and look at a full review, just one item like hours of service or maintenance or something like that. And so they'll walk away unrated. Most of you are aware that we did a study on this about 9 months ago, that over 75% of all motor carriers today are unrated because they're just not doing enough any more full compliance review. They're only now looking at, can we solve the problem, not working out as a review. If you look at some of the risks now, you'll see that they had their original safety rating of satisfactory, additional unsatisfactory 5 or 6 years ago. They've had a visit since then, but the visit says unrateable, which means it wasn't a full compliance review. And so they're going to move from this to roadside inspections. So when this safety fitness determination rule is published, the agency will assign monthly safety ratings to carriers based on all of them rather than this other. It'll be computer-driven based on what they find from the DOT officer's report on the roadside activities that lead to a crash, not based on the visit. The visit findings versus the roadside activities. This is going to be more current information because it's going to be ongoing. But will it be a stir-up? The safety fitness determination will look for patterns of behavior violation in specific areas. Director says 6 of the 7 basics show possible correlation with crashes. Well, if you listen to Dan Murray, one of the ones that he said there was driver fitness. Yet in the areas of driver fitness, you found out that is a positive. There's fewer crashes with people with an alert in driver fitness than who do not. So even the director data is not there. So, the argument, crash correlation will be there, and the actual study shows there's a false in there, but this is going to be a game changer. It's really going to make a whole lot of difference here, and the problem is it's going to be ongoing roadside activity, so if it's done correctly, it might be a more accurate predictor of a current operation. But by changing monthly, it's going to be a real concern with us. So the FMCA's interpretation of the basic versus the safety event group method and the insurance carriers and shippers and court interpretation violation will be what's considered. Will this happen? I don't know. The rule is supposed to come out in July, the end of July now. It'll be challenged in court. One of the things that we're going to do as far as our annual conference is Rob Moses is going to talk about these challenges and what's going to be done. When, if it happens, yes, it'll impact our insurance, major. The motor carrier needs to be aware that also their current inspection could affect the safety fitness determination depending on how long it's going to take for the law to come in, because they're going to look retrospectively to their past history on that. We're dealing with politics. The FMC, the safety fitness determination must become law. It must be passed by Congress, and with the new makeup in Congress, will they take these many motor carriers? Will they allow this to happen? The problem with Congress, obviously, is it's made up a lot of lawyers, where a lot of them are plaintiff lawyers, make money here, which they use in court or not. As we mentioned earlier, Ann Fury told Congress last summer that FMCSA's focus is on safety, not the trucking industry. She left the new interim director, and the new Congress now is having to deal with this. Congress has shown a willingness to suspend the restart rule. How will they react to the safety fitness determination rule? Rich, you got any thoughts about that?
No, and in light of the time, let's press on. I want to hit on something else. My only point is there's a lot of paranoia when I talk to motor carriers because they don't like what they're already living under these things, and what this SFD is going to be like, and what it may do to change the profile of what they look like. And if they can't control something that now makes them look bad, and their shippers take loads away, that load's gone. And they're going to pick another motor carrier, and there's a lot of fear that they're going to have chaos when that does come into play.
All right, to move on, a couple of hot subjects, increased limits. You all have heard this discussion. You know the limits are up there. The government took input up until February 26th. The study showed that there needs to be increased. How much it will go to, who knows? That's the history here that you have in this. Early on, it was projected to go to 1.5 million or more. Currently, maybe not. Not with Congress involved, not with American Trucking Association, not with IATA suggesting that the limits do not have to be raised. Hopefully, it will show that it will not be to the higher limits that we were looking at. Do you provide your thoughts? Did you provide your thoughts? I suggested you did. It's too late to now. I did mine, again, talking about the problems and not to raise the limit. Currently, 200,000 motor carriers have 91X filings. 100,000 of those have filings of 750,000. So that means if the limits are raised over 750,000, then the insurance carriers, to keep the insured in compliance, will have to make new filings at higher limits on a certain date to keep your insured operating, and depending on the limits that are required and limits of the policy, might have to also offer the opportunity for the insured to increase their limits, and if they don't, and collect the premium or accept it, to cancel the filings. It's going to be a real concern depending on what the number comes out, and it's going to be another month or two, but we'll keep you abreast of that part of it too.
I just want to say on that, if you didn't look, there's 2,157 responses. There's a lot of responses on this topic, and many are against it, but as Tommy's going to probably tell you, one trucking industry group is for it. It's not just plaintiff attorneys and the victims, and so this is going to be an interesting one to see how it plays out.
And we will keep you as a part of the foundation abreast of this and give you suggestions how to handle it. The concern is not only for the lower limits, 750 to 1 million, but what's going to happen to the 1 million hazardous now if they're hauling anything hazardous? Will it go to 2 million or above? And how about the 5 million? Are they going to 10 million? I mean, this is going to really be, that's a small part of our trucking industry, but the things that we have to deal with. A couple other things, electronic login devices, that has been pushed back until November of this year. That's still being discussed. The electronic login devices do cure the paper problems and do cure a couple of the two major violations that FMCS has, and that's form and manner of a paper log and it not current. And until your insureds move to electronic logs, they're going to have a very difficult time to keep their scores in line for the safety event group. Plus, court systems have used this as a problem and actually called paper logs comment books, and have brought up that the insureds who do not use electronic login devices are cheating in the court systems. These are only a few of the regulations updates. Items to keep coming is speed limiters, drug clearinghouses, the uniform registration system, which will have a new application. The MC numbers will go away. The proof of financial responsibility will be for DOT, for-hire truckers, holders, and others. We'll keep you abreast of this part of it. We do blogs and face-to-face. We do webinars coming up, and our annual conference is going to look at these items. We're going to have an officer from the American Trucking Association to discuss these changes. We're going to have our lawyer friends, Rob Mosley, Greg Fury, and Jay Taylor, talk about this impact. Plus, we are going to do a post session, the afternoon of Friday, after it's over, we're going to look at the driver shortage, and we're going to look at driver training schools, underwriting the drivers, and we're going to have representatives from these people to discuss those things. All this is trying to keep you abreast of what's happening to our motor carriers from a regulatory standpoint so that you'll be able to help them conform to it if you are a retail agent, and if you're an insurance provider, to help you to look at it in a broader spectrum to properly underwrite and price and select the risk that you want to do business with. Rich, in closing, you want to add a couple things?
No, I think you did a good job today, Tommy. I appreciate it. I just want to comment that, we hit a lot of FMCSA stuff, but keep in mind there's other groups out there like the National Transportation Safety Board that's also buzzing about speed limiters, collision warning devices, electronic stability. These are the things that Dan talks about at ATRI. And again, just so the fact that, Dan stays my friend, keep in mind there's great stuff on that ATRI site. I've advocated use of that idling compendium to give that as a service tool to your customers. But again, information out there that's helpful to you and them about congestion, these driver demographics, where commercial motor vehicle enforcement exists, and what it really costs to operate, and helping your customers, to deal with those issues. So thanks for attending. Thanks for having me, Tommy.
Yeah. The next webinar, April 2nd, 2 p.m., we're going to look at how your insured can go into data queue and take some of their violations down, and what will be taken down, and how to do it to improve the scores. We hope you have a good month. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and thank you for your participation and your support. We're out of here.